People's Platform.
Good evening and welcome to the People's Platform. With only 2 weeks to go before Sri Lanka elects its 9th executive president, the election stage is heating up. And one of the prerequisites of holding an election is ensuring that a conducive environment prevails where a free and fair election can be held. One of the most important stakeholders in creating such an enabling environment leading up to a transparent electoral process free from interference and manipulation are election observers. Joining me now is Inta, Lase, Deputy Chief Observer, European Union Election Observation Mission. Good evening and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for inviting me and for giving me this privilege to speak about our mission. Thank you.
Absolutely. Inta, if you could speak to us about the evolution of the EU Election Observation Mission. It has had a long-standing relationship with Sri Lanka and Sri Lanka's elections, having supported its electoral processes for over 2 decades. You have 13 teams currently in the island. How will you ensure that these 13 teams are divided across the expanse of the island in an equitable manner? Speak to us also about your mandate. Speak to us about the values of transparency and your role in being observers.
Thank you very much. That's a very, very broad scope that you are inviting me to speak about. But let's start with the beginning. So why and how an European Union decides on deploying or not deploying an election observation mission. So first of all, the European Union has to receive an invitation from national authorities. In the case of Sri Lanka, European Union received an invitation from Election Commission of Sri Lanka as well as from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Right. And you are right in your question saying that it's not for the first time. We are here for the 7th time already with an election observation mission which has basically 3 principles how we operate. And this is where we are coming to the mandate. We are independent, we are impartial, and we are not interfering in the process. And what are we doing here in Sri Lanka? We are observing. We are looking at various aspects of elections because you know, and everybody knows, that elections is not only the election day. It's everything what happens before elections as well as what happens after the elections. And before elections, the mission is deployed approximately some 5 weeks before the voting day, and the mission always starts with arrival of so-called core team analysts, 10 experts that are based here in Colombo, and each analyst assesses a different area, different topic of elections, so to say. We have a political analyst, we have electoral analyst, we have the legal analyst who looks into the legal framework and laws governing the electoral process, and of course we have the media analyst and social media analyst who are looking respectively into the traditional and social media landscapes. So once these 10 analysts are here in the capital, then the chief observer comes. And the chief observer is a member of the European Parliament who leads the mission, who is the spokesperson of the mission, who officially launches the mission. And our chief observer is Nacho Sanchez Amor, and he is a member of the Parliament from Spain. Just last week, he was here in Sri Lanka. He opened the mission, held high-level meetings, met with Election Commission, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Prime Minister. He also met with political parties, civil society organizations, media representatives, and most importantly, he spoke to our long-term observers, the ones you mentioned in your question, these 26 people who are divided into the teams of 2, and they are deployed all across the country, which means that in each province we have at least 1 team covering the province. And when this team goes to the province, you may ask, like, it's impossible for 2 people to cover the entire province. It's big, right? It's correct. But we have a long-standing, very robust methodology that we are employing not only here in Sri Lanka, but in any given country where the European Union observes. And how this methodology works means the team arrives, let's say, in Badula They are having the first meeting with the district election commissioner. They are discussing how the election preparations are going. They are looking how are the trainings organized, trainings conducted. Then, of course, in that province, there are also political parties. So our observers are going to the headquarters and party offices, meeting with political parties, listening what are their thoughts about the electoral process, how it is unfolding, what are the positive developments, what are the challenges they are facing. Then, of course, our long-term observers are also meeting with citizen observer groups. Right. You have a very strong and solid tradition in Sri Lanka of citizen observation. And we know that the organizations have deployed their long-term observers, so our long-term observers are going, meeting, discussing. But it's not enough to give an assessment. It's not enough. They observe how the rallies are held. They are going out from towns to villages to speak with community leaders to see whether also people who are living in small communities, probably sometimes in underprivileged communities, whether they are receiving information about elections, whether they are aware when the elections are taking place, how they have to mark the ballot, who are the candidates. So our observers, every day they are holding up to 4 or 5 meetings with different stakeholders, not only in towns but also in the villages. And then at the end of the week, our observers collect this information and write a report that is received here in Colombo and analyzed by those 10 analysts that are here in Colombo. But also the analysts, they are not just sitting around and waiting for the reports to come in. They are going to the meetings themselves at the national level, regularly meeting with election commission, also meeting with the political party headquarters, with the headquarters of citizen observer groups. So they collect the information at the national level. And then this information is collected and put, so to say, block by block, week by week, and then the election day will come. And 2 days after the elections, our chief observer will present mission's findings, assessment and conclusions on the electoral process in the public press conference in Colombo, where he will provide assessment. And then, of course, you also asked in your question, what is our assessment based on? Our assessment is based on 3 cornerstones, so to say. First of all, it's a national law of Sri Lanka. To what extent the electoral process has been conducted in line with the law that is a Sri Lankan law. And second, to what extent the electoral process is conducted in line with regional standards that Sri Lanka has signed to. And then the last step is to what extent Sri Lanka has conducted the electoral process in line with international standards for democratic elections. Yeah, that's briefly.
Okay, fantastic. That was a very comprehensive first response. Inta, what specific criteria does the EU election observation mission use in particular to evaluate the fairness of Sri Lanka's presidential election?
And here we are coming back to the international standards. The first one that comes to mind of every journalist is freedom of expression. Mm-hmm. It's one of the principles. We also have a freedom of association, freedom of movement, right to vote, right to participate. Mm-hmm. And these rights, and then the mission is looking to what extent these rights are expected. And these rights not only concerns the candidates or journalists or civil society organizations. Most importantly, we are looking whether these rights are respected when it comes to a common voter. A voter also not only in the capital, but voter in the villages. And as I was saying in the first answer, is very important to see that voters all across the country are receiving a balanced, measured information, comprehensive information on which they can make a choice on. And also that voters have the opportunity to register as voters and to participate in elections freely without pressure or being intimidated or being afraid of going out and vote. So these are the criteria, these are the principles that we are looking at, and based on those principles we are making then our assessment.
In the unlikely event that you do observe any violations of this nature, you said that non-interference is one of the key aspects governing the EU election observation mission. So then what would be the response?
First of all, it's very important really to stress these three overarching principles: independence, impartiality, and non-interference. And if there is a situation where some electoral stakeholder would feel that his or her rights are violated, the mission would receive this information, collect such information, analyze it, and then, as I was saying, after the election day, 2 days after the elections, the chief observer will present the the preliminary statement, where these situations will be assessed and analyzed. And it's very important that the mission is not giving out any premature assessments, because the process, it's a longer process, and it's always important to keep in mind that the process is over only once the ballots are counted, and once, if there are any complaints, then the legal avenues are exercised and used, and only then the process is completed. And then it's important for the European Union to look at the process holistically, not picking out the elements while we are still on the way, so to say.
Sure. What are some of the most significant challenges or concerns that you anticipate in observing an election in general?
One of the global challenges, and that's a challenge not only for Sri Lanka, that's a challenge for each and every country that is holding elections this year, and that's disinformation. And for that reason, as I was mentioning, we have in team media analyst and the social media analyst. And why I'm saying that disinformation is a challenge for each and everyone, and also for different countries across the globe, because disinformation has the power to confuse the voter, to mislead the voter, to affect voters' way of participation, not in a fair way. And therefore, this is very challenging in countries to find the best recipe, how to address it. And there is no one recipe that would fit any given country. And but what is very encouraging, what we are seeing here in Sri Lanka, is very active fact-checking initiatives that are also joined hands with Election Commission to speak in one voice with global tech companies, and that also the global tech companies are asked to take steps to preserve the information environment, to take measures against those ones who are trying to influence the voter with false or misleading information.
Inta, this is incidentally the first election where Sri Lanka has its own statutory framework on campaign financing. Are there any specific areas or issues of concern that the EU is primarily focusing on during this election in Sri Lanka on campaign financing, on voter suppression?
You know, in 2019, the European Union Election Observation Mission made several recommendations, and one of the priority recommendations was to decide and introduce a framework that would allow to reduce the role of money in elections. So that elections are about ideas, not about who has more resources and who can use more money in campaigning. Therefore, it's very encouraging to see that a new system is established, and as all the Sri Lankans, the European Union is also observing how this system will work for the first time. And I think it's very important that we let the system work and we see until the end how it works. And there definitely will be very positive lessons learned, and there will be also areas where small improvements will be helpful. But these can be said only after the elections, only after this system is fully exercised. Because we know, like the 2 weeks before elections, these are the weeks where the campaign is heating up and there more spending is expected. Let's see how it will work.
Yeah, and also you were in Sri Lanka during the 2019 presidential election. Following the EU election observation mission's assessment post-election, what recommendations did the Sri Lankan government implement?
So we already mentioned one. This is on the campaign finance. And so just to that I read the act correctly, like for instance, there was one recommendation to take measures that personal data and privacy would be protected. So we know that in 2022 the Personal Data Protection Act was introduced.
Yes.
So this is also one of the recommendations to find the method how privacy can be protected. Another very important recommendation that was made, also a priority recommendation, so that young people can participate in elections as voters after the so-called cut-off date of the voter register. So this time, for the first time, young people could register also using the online portal, and it's more inclusive, making the election more inclusive. There are also a recommendation to improve participation for persons with disabilities. Again, we see that there are measures taken to improve participation of persons with disabilities in elections as voters. But I would like to conclude with a very important recommendation that we also made in 2019. We recommended that Sri Lanka, for the next elections, is trying to find the best mechanism how to consolidate a voice of civil society, media, fact checkers, and also election administration once addressing the tech companies. And this time we see there is this positive movement. So yeah, these are the areas.
All right. I'm in conversation with Inta Lase, Deputy Chief Observer, European Union Election Observation Mission. We go in for a short commercial break. We'll be right team. Inta, when we speak about the EU's election observation mission work, how does the EU coordinate with local election authorities and other international observers to ensure a comprehensive and unbiased playing field?
So we are invited by Election Commission, and Election Commission of Sri Lanka is also one of our main interlocutors when it comes to receiving information and observing the activities that are conducted by election administration in the run-up to the elections. And on a positive note, so far our observers, and not only here in the capital but also in the provinces, we have not received any reports that the observers would be denied access to election administration, access to information. And also yesterday our observers were observing the postal voting all across Sri Lanka. So when it comes to the citizen observer groups, we are holding regular meetings. We are ready and eager to listen to their observations, and we also are ready to share small bits here and there of what we are seeing, so to say, to compare the notes. We fully respect the independence of citizen observer groups, and we think they are doing a great job in observing the election environment, and it's always too good to compare notes with partners.
Speaking about another partner in this enterprise, how does the EU monitor the media landscape and its influence on the electoral process in Sri Lanka?
Very good question, because the European Union has a long-established methodology that is applied in each and every country where we are observing. So we have a team of locally recruited media monitors, in total 5 people speaking both languages, Tamil and Sinhala, and of course English. Then we our media monitoring unit is recording a prime time broadcasts on main TV channels and radio stations, and then they are measuring the time that is allocated to each political actor during these prime time hours. It's been entered into the database, and then the number magic happens, and we see how the time is divided among different political players.
So data analytics play a key role. What role does public engagement and civil society play in the monitoring process?
We see, and that's not only in Sri Lanka, but in every country, the European Union always reaches out to citizen observer groups, because these are Sri Lankan elections. And it's very encouraging to see many young people actively participating and guarding the democracy, so to say, participating as election observers. And these are our counterparts, colleagues, and we regularly meet with them.
Inta, speak to us also about what happens in the immediate aftermath of the election community.
2 days after the elections, the European Union Election Observation Mission will hold an open press conference. All journalists and media are invited to broadcast and to report on the press conference, during which our chief observer will present the preliminary statement that would then contain an assessment of electoral process against national law, regional and international standards. While waiting for the press conference, I invite also to see our social media accounts, because on our social media accounts we are publishing regularly information about our meetings, because we believe in the value of transparency, and we are very transparent about the way we operate. Therefore, our social media accounts and website is the proof of whom we are meeting, what we are doing here in Sri Lanka. And this information that is collected during those meetings will be then reflected in this preliminary statement that will be presented by our chief observer. And it will be also published. So, of course, it's not always easy to note down all the points that are given in a longer speech. Therefore, the mission always publishes its preliminary statement. It will be on website as well as on our social media accounts.
In your opinion, how effective has this process of publishing your findings been on future elections?
We see that our recommendations were considered useful, feasible to implement, and also it was considered that it's advisable for the country to have these recommendations. And this assessment is not something that comes from us. This assessment is what comes from Sri Lankans, because otherwise they would not implement the recommendations and they would not take the suggestions and possible ways forward on board if they would not consider them useful and giving more strength to democracy.
Sure. I'd like to go back to a question that came up. With the advent of technology and the widespread usage of social media, misinformation and disinformation is rampant, more so in the period leading up to elections, and this is a global phenomenon. Could you specifically speak to us about the tools that your mission uses to combat this scourge?
First of all, we all know that unfortunately the most effective tool that was there for researchers, for analysts, also Sri Lankan analysts, to see the information flow and analyze the information on Facebook was the crowd tangle. That's a special tool. Unfortunately, Meta dismantled that tool. So we are on the same boat as your fact checkers, as your trusted partners, trying to find a new software, new tool that would help to have a better grasp on the information environment that is there on Facebook or Twitter or on TikTok. We are trying out several methodologies, but again, the bottom line is robust data analysis. Data analysis helps to identify the trending topics, to identify the clusters of accounts or groups that are sharing a certain type of information. This is how we work, and this also, the preliminary statement will include a section on the role of social media and digital communications in the electoral process. And yeah, but this always needs to be looked at into the context of responsibility that the global tech companies have towards the countries, towards the voters, towards the users.
Absolutely. Inta, also speaking about the assessment by the EU election observation mission, is there a mechanism by which the mission itself follows up to see whether certain recommendations have been implemented? Because if there were certain recommendations made during the 2019 election, and then certain recommendations are made during this election, and there's a gap, then there's a bit of duplicity, right?
I would say not always all recommendations are implemented, and that's normal. Because, for example, also our countries are receiving election observers. They also make recommendations, and then also my own country, we not always implement all recommendations, because the country, and it's very important that there is a discussion on the subject, but then the way forward, which is the best way forward, it's up to each country to decide. It's up to each election administration, up to each political parties or civil society who is advocating for this way or that way forward. It's important. One of the recommendations, for example, what we hear resonated very well among the civil society stakeholders was the recommendation concerning women's participation. We recommended in 2019 that there are more efforts made to enhance women's participation in politics, to make sure that voice of women is also heard in a public space. We received very positive feedback from civil society, for groups advocating for women's rights, but unfortunately we are coming back and we don't see that reflected into the law. But it's positive to hear that there was a discussion, and we hope, and in this sense, yes, we will be repeating again the recommendation regarding women's participation, probably for the next election. This recommendation will be heard also by decision makers. Let's see.
Absolutely. And it's funny you should have said that, because that was going to be my next question to you. The abysmal participation of female politicians, political candidates, and we continue to see a landscape where politics is almost a dirty word, where women are almost afraid to get into politics, and there is no culture of women getting into politics unless you are completely unbothered. In terms of solutions, do you think that a good first step would be a quota system going into parliamentary elections? Because we already have a 25% quota bylaw for women.
I think it would be too early for me to make such an assessment.
Sure.
Because how the recommendations are made. During our observation, we are meeting, as I said, with civil society organizations, also with advocates, and also with women who are active in politics. And it's also very important for us to listen what is the best way forward that they are seeing. So, and we will collect all this knowledge and all this assessment that is given by our national partners. We will consolidate, and then at the end of the mission, after the elections, we will have a discussion on these recommendations, and we will test in a discussion manner which would be the best way forward, because what fits in one country is not necessarily fitting in another country.
Sure.
So yeah, we really hope to find the best way, but when it comes to the women's participation in politics, it always starts with political party. right?
Yeah,
with structures that are there in a political party, and regardless whether in Sri Lanka or in Latvia, whether the party has structures and mechanisms that would advance women, able young women, take step by step and one day finish as the presidential candidate. And yeah.
Yeah, and also I'd like to pick your brain on this concept of intra-party democracy, where we see in a majority of political parties, it's all a boys' club, so to speak, and there is very little prioritization for women, of women. So when there is very little intra-party democracy, good decision making is kind of lost.
It makes democracy stronger if women participate and if women's voices are heard. Trust me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this conversation, for sharing your perspectives. Inta, Lase, it was a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
All right, fantastic. Thank you for watching us. We'll see you again next Friday. Good night.